This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
Oh, goody. It's Friday, and you know what that means. Time for another groundbreaking installment of let's talk about how bad modern pro wrestling is. Of course, I'm being facetious. Wink, wink. Welcome aboard to the Five Starr Wrestling Report, new and returning viewers. We are here on YouTube and Rumble each Monday and Friday to bring you wrestling discussions and recaps. If you are new to the show and checking it out for the first time, make sure to subscribe and like the video. As per usual, with the Friday edition, we've got AEW Dynamite to run down, in addition to our retro review series portion of the podcast, where we cover NWA World Championship Wrestling and World Class Championship Wrestling. Dynamite, which we always like to discuss first on the show, it had its shares of ups and downs, as did the two retro shows we're going to be discussing today. I will at least give AEW credit, whatever that pile of dog crap was they fed me last week, they at least tried to make up for it this week with, giving me a lesser pile of dog crap than usual. It's baby steps, but progress is progress, right? And I guess now is as good a time as any to just dive right into it. And this was the 420 edition of AEW Dynamite from Wednesday night. And they were in Pittsburgh, my hometown, in fact. And when you combine the idea of AEW hosting Dynamite from Pittsburgh on 420 with that kind of crowd, yeah, it's probably best I didn't buy tickets to go see that show live. Not that I was ever really contemplating it to begin with. And trust me, there were plenty of moments during this show where I was actually wondering how many hits Tony Khan took before he booked this one. However, if I was going to buy a ticket to see a match live, and quite frankly, if they'd have hyped this match for more than 7 days, I may have thought about it longer to see CM Punk versus Dustin Rhodes. What a great professional wrestling match. For everything that the Penta match was not on last week's episode of Dynamite, this was the polar opposite of it. In a good way. It is still almost unbelievable to me how the AEW crowd perceives Cody versus Dustin. Like, Cody in WWE is a completely different story. I'm talking solely based on the crowd reception that Cody was getting in AEW for the better part of a year leading to him leaving. For all of the issues you can muster up as to what led to the problems between Cody and the AEW crowd, none of that ever rubbed off the wrong way on Dustin. Despite the brotherhood. He's different, man. Like, Dustin has that sort of babyface connection with the fans that is just so rare to come by these days. It's that veteran level of respect, similar to Punk, but kind of on a different spectrum, where you can't help but admire the fact that Dustin is still a top performance at his age, and not just top performance, but I'm even argue to a certain extent, doing some of the best work he's done in his entire career. Certainly as a singles wrestler. He's without a doubt in the single best shape I've ever seen him in. And even if he may not move as quickly as he did 20 or so years ago, goddamn, his stuff looks so smooth. Everything he does in the ring is just second nature to him because he understands how to work a crowd. He understands the importance of ring psychology and how to pace things, how to keep a crowd emotionally invested from start to finish without having to resort to all the unnecessary flips and dives and stunt show routines. And simple things like working body parts and focusing on ground game. And yes, this match was essentially babyface versus babyface, and I mean, you can make a valid argument this ended up not faring particularly well for Punk by the end, because he got some pretty boisterous boos at various points throughout the match. You know, especially toward the end there, once they started picking up things and Punk started making all the gold dust gestures, that really pissed a lot of people off. You know, by the end there, when Punk was teasing the GTS a couple times, like you could hear a large chunk of the crowd booing him. It was very audible. For whatever reason, they did not want to see Dustin lose this match. I mean, I don't really need to go into great detail about any spots they did here. It was all basic, fundamental pro wrestling. Punk worked over Dustin's left knee after he took a spill to the outside early on. Dustin targeted Punk's left arm and shoulder to try and evade the GTS attempts. Yeah, they really picked up things there by the end. A couple nice false finishes that Dustin got on Punk that popped the crowd. And the end result was Punk attempting the GTS, but the bad arm gave out on him, so Dustin tried to give Punk the sunset, but Punk reversed that and stacked up Dustin to cradle him for the 3. Great match, great story. Love seeing these two professional vets get the chance to work against each other at a top level. Again, almost kind of wish they'd have given this more build than they did, you know, especially with the way Tony Khan books. I mean, if they ever do decide to revisit this feud down the road and do a rematch, it'd be like 2 years from now after having never talked about the damn thing until the week before they book it again. And of course, afterwards, they did the Hangman Page Punk stare down on the ramp. Definitely wasn't where I thought they were going to get the belt off of Adam Page, but maybe the plan is to have Punk beat Page before setting up MJF for the next title shot. It makes sense, and I think there's definitely more drama in seeing MJF beat CM Punk for the world title as opposed to beating Hangman Page. You know, and I've already talked extensively about how Page really hasn't done it for me as the world champion, but if anyone knows how to turn chicken crap into chicken salad, it's Punk. So, I mean, that's at least a program I could get somewhat invested in. It's certainly more enticing than Page and Cole, which was garbage from the onset. So this is a great opening to the show. As was the follow-up pre-tape with Wardlow arriving at the building, flanked by security at the door. And as per MJF's contractual requirements, Mark Sterling informs Wardlow that from here on out, whenever he shows up at the venues, he will be handcuffed and escorted to his locker room to change, then escorted out to the ring for his match, and then once his match concludes, he will be escorted directly out of the building. And Wardlow was just great here, scoffing and rolling his eyes at the whole thing. I liked when he patted Sterling on the shoulder and said, "No problem, bud." But this is exactly what security should have been doing with Wardlow from the jump instead of just pulling him back and letting him leave under his own power. Now they're finally breaking out the handcuff gimmick. Good. It's about time. And we'll get into the later stuff with Wardlow, but up to this point, this is all good material. And as per usual with AEW, they usually have to follow something great with something, well, not so great. Bryan Danielson, Jon Moxley, and Wheeler Yuta versus Dante Martin, Lee Moriarty, and Brock Anderson. Yeah, this was not so great. By the way, Wheeler Yuta has new tights now. They're generic white pants with blood splatter patterns on them. Looks horrible. And I've already kind of talked about my feelings about this whole Blackpool Fight Club crew. I think it's dumb. It does absolutely nothing for Danielson, aside from wedging him in with another crowded AEW faction that no one cares about. I guess my question, and I talked about this all the time with AEW squash matches, because no one knows how to book effective squash matches anymore. But seriously, why is it taking the Blackpool group almost 10 full minutes to beat 3 job guys? And like, this isn't even comparable to something that you may have seen on a studio show back in the day, because at least in those kinds of multi-person tags where, like, say the Horsemen were squaring off against, I don't know, I'll just throw 3 random guys out there: George South, Tony Zayn, and Rocky King. Even if those matches got a little bit of time, say 10 minutes, for example, the Horsemen were not fucking selling for large chunks of that match, and they certainly were not letting the babyface jobbers get hot tags. And I get it's Lee Moriarty's hometown, so I don't know, they felt obligated to throw the guy a bone and let him shine for a little bit, but I mean, come on now. What in the fuck has Lee Moriarty ever done in AEW that necessitated him running wild on 2 of their top guys? I don't even like Jon Moxley, but the visual of Lee making a comeback on Mox was just downright ridiculous. Of course, by the end, it broke down into the usual chaotic AEW clusterfuck where everyone has to do all their choreographed gymnastic routines. And after everyone's in the ring doing spots and the ref's just standing there waiting for everyone to disperse, finally Moxley hits Dante with the paradigm shift and pins him. God, how quick were they to take the piss out of Dante Martin? Remember when that guy was like one of the most prominently featured dudes on the television program? That's Tony Khan's booking for you. We had some terrible acting with the Undisputed Elite backstage. Made even more absurd that it was a terrible skit involving the Beta Bucks, and I don't think they said one word in the entire promo. Apparently they're beside themselves after losing to FTR 2 weeks ago. Anyway, I don't know what was said. Something about Cole wanting to do a 10-man tag next week so the Elite can regain their focus or something. Can someone please tell Tony Khan that he needs to cut out this Cutler Cam bullshit with the Elite? It's so Bush League every time they do it. It just makes me want to turn off the show in embarrassment. And I live alone. And then came the special Tony Khan announcement. Because apparently they didn't learn their lesson the first time after giving Tony Khan a live mic and sending him out there to try and speak to a broadcast televised audience. To say it was cringe would be understating it. But thank the Lord above, they made sure to keep Tony's dialogue short and sweet to the point here. So Tony brings out New Japan Pro Wrestling president Takami Obari. I think I'm pronouncing that right. And, well, he didn't say anything either. He was just kind of there. Also, Adam Cole could interrupt on the Jumbotron and do a pre-tape message announcing that on June 26th in Chicago, AEW and New Japan are presenting Forbidden Door, the pay-per-view. And that was basically it. A supercard, super show event with AEW and New Japan talent. I presume wrestling each other in opposition, although I'm not entirely certain on that. All I know is they had Jay White come out to say that the show is not about New Japan or about AEW, but it's about Elite versus Bullet Club. And right there, that was the point I became completely disinterested and disengaged myself entirely. Look, I'm not going to harp on it too much right now because the show is still long enough out where I feel like I should wait a little bit to see what they actually come up with for a card. But, I mean, I've been on and off with New Japan for a long time now as a viewer. I watch the G1 every year. I try to watch the big pay-per-view specials when I can. You know, COVID's had a lot to do with my ongoing problems with New Japan's product in the last few years, but, you know, even before that whole thing really hit, I was already kind of desensitized to a lot of what New Japan was doing circa 2018 or even 2019. I guess I'm just not totally sold on the crossover promotional idea between New Japan or AEW. Hey, like as a super card, they might be able to get a few big matches out of the card for a night. And I am actually interested to see if they'll get guys like Okada or Tanahashi or Zack Sabre Jr. or Will Ospreay booked for the show, but I don't know. I just haven't been all that invested in New Japan's product for such a long time now. I don't know how excited I can get about the idea of them doing this pay-per-view. And especially when they're coming out and basically saying it's all going to be built around the Bullet Club Elite drama. Dude, I'll pass. I always thought the Bullet Club was stupid. And, if you've watched any of my AEW reviews, you already know my thoughts on the Beta Bucks and the Elite and all that middle school garbage. I know Ring of Honor used to do the annual New Japan ROH Super Show every year, so maybe this is AEW's replacement or extension of that annual tradition, but this one I'm still on the fence about. There are definitely some matches that would intrigue me if they're going to do the New Japan versus AEW route. God, even with all the talent they've got under contract right now, is this something that they really need to be bothering with right now? Don't they already have enough people locked under contract that they need to be focusing on instead? And now you're thinking about bringing in even more talent from across the globe? Even if it is like a one-night only kind of investment, that crossover talent is still going to be taking up a bulk of the screen time on AEW television in the build to those matches. I'm just kind of concerned that all it's going to do is muddy up the show with more talent and more hastily booked segments, which is the last thing AEW needs to be doing right now. I'll come back and revisit this talking point at a later date, maybe in a month or so once they start putting a card together. But from the initial onset announcement, I know that people are going to get emotionally invested in it because of the possibilities that could come out of it, but I'm not sold. I'm sorry. I just see way too many potential problems that could come out of this, among more reasons than I just listed above. But like I said, I don't want to get so hung up on that right now. So then we got Butcher versus Wardlow. And I think the one fear I had going into this match when they first advertised it was, my God, how in the fuck is Wardlow supposed to pick up the Butcher and powerbomb him? Well, he did it. Didn't look great, but he did. I winced and cringed with each progressive powerbomb, just crossing my fingers and toes, hoping Wardlow didn't drop Butcher on his fucking head. He came close. The match was kind of clunky, if I'm being honest, but it's more of a nitpick than anything. MJF and Shawn Spears were up in the skybox for the match, and it was made even better by the fact that even with the heels keeping their distance from ringside for the match, they still had Wardlow come out to the ring in handcuffs. No entrance music either, which is a good touch. It did what it was supposed to do, and then after Wardlow won, the goons cuffed him and took him right out of the arena. Of course, MJF and Spears are flipping their shit in the skybox the whole time. Like I said, it was all fine. Yeah, I like where this story direction is going, and while I'm not particularly looking forward to having to watch Lance Archer wrestle Wardlow next week, the stuff they're doing with Wardlow now is exactly what they should be doing. Right now, he's just fucking with MJF by steamrolling through his hand-selected opponents, and he's not fazed with him being personally escorted in and out of the building in handcuffs, because he knows the end game. He knows when he gets the opportune chance and he gets his hands on MJF, it's curtains. It makes him actually look like a competent babyface. I know. Novel concept, right? So this is all good. And then we had Jungle Boy versus Kyle O'Reilly in an Owen Hart tournament qualifying match. I almost forgot how great O'Reilly is in singles competition. It's been so long since I've seen it. I'd probably have to go back and watch some of his old NXT matches from last year when he was wrestling Finn Balor and Adam Cole. It actually kind of made me that much more happy that O'Reilly won, Because after watching him in this match, I want to see more Kyle O'Reilly singles matches. I mean, Lord knows we're going to see another one on AEW television after he loses to Samoa Joe. I loved hearing Jim Ross and Tony Schiavone arguing over the fact that nobody uses a fucking overhead wrist lock in the business anymore. It's like one of those instances where anyone that's an old school fan of wrestling from the 80s just sits there and laughs, hearing Jim get visibly angry that nobody knows how to use basic holds anymore. Or worse, they know how, but they choose not to. Makes it even more egregious. And I know I haven't been too hot on Jungle Boy lately, but I mean, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I almost kind of prefer watching Jungle Boy in singles matches than tag matches. It's almost like watching him wrestle in a parallel universe when he's doing one-on-one matches. He's one half of their world tag team champions, yet the best stuff I ever see out of Jungle Boy, most of that usually comes when he's in there wrestling by himself. Yeah, I think a lot of people would chalk that up to pointing the blame at Luchasaurus, but I'm really not. I like Luchasaurus. He's certainly not a mastermind in the ring or anything like that, but I think the problem with the Jurassic Express as a duo is that they just haven't been able to figure out how to effectively work as a tag team. No one's trained them or taught them how to do proper tag team wrestling without reverting to every single modern trope that we see in every tag match nowadays. You know, where it ends up turning into a free-for-all indie style match where everyone's just doing double team spots and there's no fluidity or coherency to anything. Jungle Boy's really sound on his own, but man, you put him in the ring and give him opportunity to do double team spots with other guys, it's like I'm watching an untrained outlaw guy in there sometimes. I don't know what it is, but the whole idea of Jungle Boy as a tag team worker just doesn't hit home with me the same way it does watching him in there work by himself. But this is a fantastic match. I really mean that. O'Reilly's shit looks great. Jungle Boy got a chance to actually sell and work from underneath for a period of time. He had some nice brisk flurries of offense in there. And, you know, we talk about this all the time, how AEW overdoes with all the run-ins and the outside bullshit so often in their matches. And, you know, with Fish and Cole kind of lurking in the backdrop, I mean, this would have been a prime time to have him come out and run interference for O'Reilly. But they didn't do that. No, instead, Jungle Boy locked in the snare trap. O'Reilly got the ropes. Jungle Boy tried for one final big move from the top rope, but O'Reilly cut him off, hit a nice superplex, followed it up with a brainbuster on Jungle Boy, and then went up top and landed the diving knee into Jungle Boy's head and pinned him clean. No run-ins, no outside shenanigans, just one guy beat another guy clean. Yes, the guy that got pinned was one half of their tag team champions, but I mean, let's be blunt, Jungle Boy hasn't exactly set the world on fire as a champion since he won the straps with a dinosaur anyway. I think most people at this point are expecting FTR to win the belts in the not-so-distant future. So I ended up enjoying this match a lot more than I thought I would going in. And hopefully Tony took special note of this match and strongly considers booking more singles matches for O'Reilly on television, because that is something I'd actually look forward to seeing every week. You know, just as long as he's not wrestling fucking Danhausen or the Denim Dork. And then we got Hook's debut. Dynamite debut, that is. He beat some gray-haired tattoo schlub named Anthony Henry with the Taz mission. And speaking of Danhausen, he came out from under the ring to say that he's had enough of Hook no-selling all of his fake curse attempts. So now he wants to fight Hook. Hopefully they book it on Dark so I don't have to watch it. And then the show got weird. Sammy Guevara and Ty Conti came out for a promo segment. And I know this has kind of been a circulating story with the whole Guevara-Conti thing recently. The fans have seemed to have found their newest toy to heckle and boo any chance they get. And when you really look at it on the surface, it's actually pretty hilarious. The whole story is, the people are mad at Sammy because he's got a hot girlfriend, And like 99.9% of the AEW male fan base has never touched a girl's boobs in their entire lives, much less managed to nail a hot babe. And Sammy pretty much says the quiet part out loud. He's like, for all of you that can't get over the fact that my girlfriend's hotter than yours, be mad. It'd have been better if he would have told everyone to bite him. So the whole thing is absurd on its face, but okay, whatever. The fans are jealous because Sammy's girlfriend is a 9, so they hate him. Great. People are fucking retarded. What can I say? So out come Dan Lambert, Ethan Page, and Scorpio Sky to play the role of the babyfaces here. And when Dan Lambert is actually getting babyface pops, you can pretty much tell your character psychology is all kinds of fucked up. So they do some bickering and bantering back and forth. Lambert said something about Scorpio giving Sammy the beating that his girlfriend can only dream about. And then Sammy agreed to a rematch with Scorpio if he agrees to some kind of mixed tag match that they never clarified. And they play Sammy's theme. And then literally, the split frame before they cut to an Aleister Black pre-tape, Guevara goes, next week, ladder match, bitch. And I went, huh? Yes, exactly like that. Huh? A ladder match, you say? How? Why? And never mind the ladder match. Let's put that on the back burner for a second. What the fuck is all this nonsense about a mixed tag match? Can we go back to that for a minute? Scorpio agrees to a phantom mixed tag where his partner is unspecified. I presume it's Paige Van Zant, even though her name was never actually mentioned in this segment. And then Sammy books a random ladder match on the fly for no reason. Is anyone else confused by this, or am I the only one out to lunch? Then we had Britt Baker, accompanied by members of the Pittsburgh Steelers, of which I had no idea who any of them were, and yes, I am from Pittsburgh. Anyway, Britt beat a girl to qualify for the Owen Hart tournament. I've never seen this girl before. I didn't even bother writing her name down. All I know is the match was no good. Britt won with the lockjaw, and then she celebrated with the 2 Steeler teammates afterwards, and the only thing I could think the entire time was, boy, if I were Adam Cole right now, I'd be keeping my head on a swivel. Check that girl's phone, read her DMs, her texts, her emails, and make sure she ain't doing anything suspicious behind your back. Women are tricky, Adam. You always gotta have a trick up your sleeve. Oh, and for the record, don't ever give Britt Baker a mic to cut a promo after working a 5-minute TV match ever again. Just saying. All right. Before I talk about this garbage main event here, I have to talk about this briefly. I don't think I've ever laughed this hard in my entire life, but Excalibur popped me this week. He's running down the card for the upcoming Rampage and Dynamite shows. And the best way I can describe it is, someone in the production truck said, "You have 15 seconds, go." And Excalibur proceeded to do the best rapid-fire, coked-up rundown of like 10 or 11 or 12 matches, and I just started laughing. If you didn't watch this show or you glossed over this in passing, I actually want to see if I can do some kind of rendition of it, because it's the funniest fucking thing I've ever heard Excalibur say or do, and it takes a lot to get me to literally bust a nut cracking so hard, but this one did it. In approximately the order Excalibur announced these matches in, here's what I was able to get out of it. All right. We're going to give this a go. I'm going to try to do this in one take without fucking it up, so wish me luck. Rampage is Friday, back on our regularly scheduled time. It's Adam Cole versus Tomohiro Ishii in an Owen Hart men's tournament qualifying match. Tony Schiavone will interview Keith Lee and Swerve Strickland. The Murder Hawk Monster Lance Archer takes on Sir Pentico. Eddie Kingston and Daniel Garcia one-on-one with everyone else banned from ringside. Schiavone will speak with Jamie Hayter, Tony Storm, and Dr. Britt Baker, DMD. Then we have the TBS Championship match between Jade Cargill and Marina Shafir. Then 1 week from now on AEW Dynamite, Serenity goes one-on-one with Hikaru Shida in a Philly street fight. Wardlow goes one-on-one with a Murder Hawk Monster Lance Archer. Owen Hart tournament qualifying match. Dax Harwood gets Cash Wheeler one-on-one. Brief side note. What? TNT Championship ladder match, Scorpio Sky and Sammy Guevara in a 10-man tag, Adam Cole, Fish O'Reilly and the Young Bucks versus Dante Martin, Varsity Blondes, Lee Johnson, Brock Anderson, and coming up next, Andradio, Italo versus Darby Allin in a coffin match, and cut. And it was at this point that Excalibur was taken to a local medical facility to have his lungs pumped so he could functionally breathe again. I actually got my heart rate going doing that. I'm not kidding, dude. This had me rolling on the floor laughing. Never mind the fact that I have numerous questions about a good chunk of these matches they announced. For example, we touched on this, but why are Sammy Guevara and Scorpio Sky having a ladder match for the TNT title? Why are Shida and Deeb having a street fight? Other than the lazy booking excuse, they're in Philly next week. Moreover, why in the fuck are Cash Wheeler and Dax Harwood wrestling each other on television with 1 week's build? In a fucking tournament qualifier, no less? I think that was the one that set me off. That one got me. Just randomly in passing, just out of the blue, for no reason, there's the graphic on screen, Dax Harwood versus Cash Wheeler with 7 days build. For no reason. If I wasn't so busy dying of hysterics during that entire rundown, I would probably have been more furious about the whole thing, but for any of you out there that are still sold on this complete farce that Tony Khan was voted Booker of the Year in any sane, rational universe, pass me that bong and let me take a hit of whatever you're smoking, dog. Because the only thing this screamed out to me is that Tony Khan has the worst case of ADHD in the history of humanity. That and the fact that he has no idea what he's doing. But my God, if I didn't know any better, I'd have thought Russo was booking the show for the next week of television. Talk about cramming 8 weeks worth of bullshit into 2 shows. And aside from Wheeler and Harwood, I don't expect any of it to be any good. Kind of like how this main event wasn't any good. Darby Allin and Andradio Italo in a coffin match. First of all, why? No, seriously, please explain. Why was this a coffin match? Is it because this feud has sucked cock so badly since day one that they wanted to make sure they buried the payoff deep underground that they thought the coffin was befitting? Well, in that case, I'll accept that answer. And I probably should have just turned the whole show off entirely once they began the match in the opening 10 seconds with Andrade's Job Squad coming down to run blatant interference. Of course, by then I was kind of tuning out the match while I was catching up on notes, so it's not like I was really paying any attention to it. The best part of the entire match was them taking something straight out of the old TNA playbook with having Sting in the crowd in disguise under, yes, in fact, a Sting mask. Beyond ludicrous. And of course, because Sting's a fucking idiot, he had to do the crossbody off of the railing area above the entrance onto the dog pile of guys. Why? I don't know. I mean, he's going to kill himself doing it. It's going to come back to bite him in the ass, but I mean, Sting's just collecting a paycheck at this point anyway, so what does he care? At some point, and by that, I mean like 2/3 of the way through the match, they finally showed an actual visual of the coffin ringside, which of course had thumbtacks on it, because why not? I did also laugh at this spot where Andrade chose to pick up Darby into a vertical suplex position from out of the coffin so that he could carry him up the rampway and drop him on his back. Because, why try and win the match when he can just hit a guy with more moves? And beyond that, I wrote down a bunch of shit happened, and then Darby backdrop Alex Abrahantes onto the coffin lid. He hit Andrade in the back a couple times with it, and then he dived on top of it to seal the lid shut. It was lame. It was all kinds of outlaw bad. And if I had any actual investment in this feud from the beginning, I would probably be more inclined to bury it even deeper. But I do not care about Andrade. I have not really cared about anything they've done with Darby Allin in well over several months now. Sting has totally given up trying. And when the main event was over, it really made me appreciate the fact that I did not waste my money to buy a ticket to see it live. With that all said, when I look back in hindsight, I love that Punk Dustin match with every fiber of my being. I wish every Dynamite could just be 2 consecutive hours of that kind of wrestling, and this would easily be my favorite wrestling show to talk about every week. Unfortunately, Tony Khan lets the inmates run his own asylum, so we're never going to be afforded that luxury. But even so, I enjoyed the Wardlow MJF stuff. That story is rolling along just fine. I very much enjoyed that Kyle O'Reilly Jungle Boy match. And while I still have my qualms about the Jurassic Express as a duo, Jungle Boy working singles matches is actually looking to serve him a lot better as a talent than working in the tag division. And the rest of Dynamite was the usual chaotic mess of meh and downright abysmal. I don't know, it's kind of like eating a bowl of chicken noodle soup when you're a little kid. Because your mom was a stickler about making sure you ate healthy, she'd always try to throw in all the vegetables in there too. So you're like 7 or 8 years old and you love the chicken bites and you love the noodles, but you squirm and cringe when you get the spinach in there or the carrots or the celery or whatever nasty stuff your dastardly mother put into her homemade soup to make sure you were eating healthy. But all metaphor joking aside, that's pretty much what it's like watching AEW Dynamite every week. Every week, it's a constant find the hay in the needle stack thing where you pluck out like 2 or 3 good things on an entire 2-hour show and everything else just sucks. This one at least had a few more good things to talk about this week, which is actually a rarity for this company. But even so, it's still Dynamite. So anyway, let's move along here to the retro portion of the podcast. NWA World Championship Wrestling from April 19th, 1986. And the program began with some footage of the afternoon session of the 86 Crockett Cup Tournament. Mostly all prelim matches. But this set featured the Road Warriors and the Midnight Express. And as I've been touching on in the last few weeks, my plan is to review the 86 Crockett Cup for the upcoming Monday show. However, because the afternoon session of the show is mostly first-round prelim matches that really don't matter a whole lot, my plan is to just recap the evening session. So that'll be an extension for Monday's upcoming episode. And following the opening graphics, that took us to the booth for a Ric Flair promo, where he was getting everyone hyped for his match with Dusty later in the evening in New Orleans. And what a world champ Ric Flair was, letting everyone know that he's headed out to fly down to New Orleans in about 20 minutes, but he took the time to make a physical appearance at the studio show to let everyone know that after he humiliates and beats Dusty to retain the world's title, the after-party wine and hors d'oeuvres are on him, as is his hotel room, apparently, for all the girls that want to come bang him after the show. It is also important to note here that Flair actually told Dusty and the entire nation on camera, quote, he doesn't do jobs in front of 70,000 people, unquote. Yes, that was a thing that Ric Flair said out loud. And all these years later, I thought Russo was the one that loved exposing the business with insider terminology. Our first match was the Road Warriors facing off against Ray Traylor and Bill Tabb, which may have been the single best big man 60-second squash in studio wrestling history. I particularly enjoyed the spot where Animal went to try and press slam Tabb, and he only managed to get him about halfway up in the air before just dropping him straight down to the mat. But because Animal's fucking crazy strong, instead of just trying something else and not going back to the well with the same move again, Animal goes, "No. I'm getting this big fucker up, and I'm pressing this man." So, Animal just picked Tabb up to his feet again, and he hoisted him up overhead in the military press. He held him up there for a little bit to flex his muscles, and then he threw him back down to the mat. Now, I should be fair, because they were dealing with a very interesting situation, as they were filming both the TBS studio show and airing both sessions of the Crockett Cup on the same day, and the Road Warriors already having worked the afternoon session and having to fly all the way back down to New Orleans to work the evening session later on. To state that these men may have been a little jet-lagged or not in the best condition for this 1-minute squash would probably be putting it kindly. So I will not overly critique Animal for butchering a military press. God love him, if he were alive today, he could easily kick my ass in any physical condition. Then we had Dusty and Baby Doll out for a promo, mostly so Dusty could retort to Flair from earlier on, saying that he does not care about Flair's robes or private jets or any of that fancy BS. We also had Dusty say here that he doesn't do jobs in New Orleans either. It is amazing to me how much of this stuff went completely over my head at such a young age. To think that Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes were actually cutting promos on each other before their world title match, where the entire premise was, "I'm not doing a job for you, brother." It's totally ridiculous. But the show was about to pick up here with the Boogie Woogie Man, Jimmy Valiant. He comes out hot at Paul Jones and Shaska Pez Whatley, made even better by the fact that he initially referred to him as Pistol Pez. But then he asked Tony, what's he calling himself now? And Tony very nonchalantly goes, Shaska. Because why in the hell would Jimmy Valiant remember the name Shaska? I mean, the name change never made any sense to begin with, so of course it's that forgettable. Anyway, so Valiant's ranting about this, that, and the other thing, talking about him taking Whatley under his wing and caring for him when he reached out for help. But now Paul Jones has gone and turned Whatley to the dark side. Figuratively speaking. He called Whatley an Uncle Tom, which was befitting of 80s television. And then he promised to shave Whatley bald like Baron von Raschke. I think he actually said that he was going to shave Whatley's head by the end of 85/86. So I guess Valiant's looking to do some time traveling at some point. Although again, the idea that Jimmy Valiant forgot that it was 1986 at the current time would also not have completely caught me off guard. So that was a great, phenomenal babyface promo. And then they followed it with Nighthawk Coltrane versus Gene Ligon. They went like a minute, and Coltrane proceeded to fuck up the one offensive move that he needed to execute. That being his finisher, the shoulder breaker. Took him 2 attempts. I think I see why he didn't last that long in the business. We had a Rock and Roll Express promo, mostly just plugging the Crockett Cup and staking their claim to take home the trophy and that $1 million payout. It was the usual Morton Gibson delivery. Morton did most of the talking, and Gibson mumbled and stuttered his way through some words that you could barely understand. Nothing out of the ordinary. Wahoo McDaniel wrestled Vernon Deaton. I think I fell asleep. And I think a lot of that came from David Crockett's coma-inducing commentary. He referred to Wahoo's technical holds as him twisting here and twisting there. I yawned just listening to it. Wahoo won with a chop/elbow drop combo, which was basically Wahoo's only offensive move, aside from the body twisting. And then this show became fucking legendary. Paul Jones and Shaska Whatley were out to do a promo, and this was the epitome of wacky, cartoony pro wrestling in every way imaginable. While Jones is standing there doing every forced, awkward, raging heel promo you've heard him do 1,000 times before, Shaska is standing 2 feet to his left, making the world's greatest facial expressions. It is a visual that can only be best described as me suggesting you go search this and try to find it. Or if you have the Peacock subscription, just skip to this promo interview from the April 19th edition of NWA World Championship Wrestling. It is very early on the program. The gist of the whole segment was that Whatley and the rest of the Paul Jones army were going to shave Valiant bald and make him, quote, a bald-headed geek. I shit you not, that was Paul's closing lines. It was marvelously and stupendously horrible. Jones has officially gone full-fledged Hitler mode. Again, not sure if I'm allowed to say that name on YouTube or not, but fuck it, it's not like I'm monetized anyway. But that's not an exaggeration. He's got the mustache, he's got the hair slightly combed over, he's got the ring gear, he's got the stance, he's got that little whip gimmick he's carrying around now, and now he's even doing the old raging high-intensity speeches that Hitler used to give to his party members. It is a complete 1930s shtick happening here in 1986, and comedy doesn't even begin to scratch the surface as to how preposterous the whole thing is. I love it. And then J.J. Dillon immediately came out to do a promo, probably thinking to himself as he's coming out, what in the hell did I just witness? There was an oddly comedic element to him briefly trying to stand there and put over Paul Jones in a credible, serious manner, especially after that promo. But God bless him, he tried. Anyhow, JJ said that he's putting the NWA management on notice. He's giving them 7 days to make a decision as to whether Ronnie gets an MRI scan on his hand to see if it's broken or not, or he wants management to permanently ban the usage of Ronnie taping his fist in any sanctioned NWA match going forward. Then Magnum TA beat Paul Goner with a belly-to-belly. Hey, he at least broke out a standing dropkick for this one. At least he's experimenting with some new material. We had Precious Paul Ellering out for a brief promo. Really nothing to note about that one, just promising that once Hawk and Animal wrap up their issues with the Russians, they'll be set to square off with the Midnights. Gorgeous Jimmy Garvin versus George South. So, here was the point where I became very conflicted watching the show, because I believe it was last week where I took a couple of minutes to actually put over George South. Out of all the NWA jobbers I've watched on these studio shows for the last 4 or 5 months now, George South is actually one of the few enhancement talents that can actually work a lick. And Jimmy Garvin, talked about how amazing that guy's been on both these NWA shows and the World Class shows that we've been recapping. I don't know what the hell happened in this match, but if I could come up with a model wrestling match for 2 guys working in complete autopilot mode, this would probably be the match. It's not to say that it was terrible, because it wasn't. We'll get to something terrible in just a few minutes, don't you worry. But it's like, I'm watching Garvin and South do this match, and I know they're both capable, competent professional wrestlers. But they did absolutely fucking nothing in this match. The entire match was Garvin putting South in a wrist lock for a little bit, and then he would do a rope spot with a back body drop. And then Garvin would grab South and put him in a waist lock. And then Garvin picked his leg and he put him in a toe hold on the mat. And they laid there. And they laid there. And they laid there. I think the sun did 6 full rotations around the earth. And Garvin was still laying with South on the mat in this goddamn toe hold. And then Garvin just picked him up and gave him a brainbuster for the 3. I don't even know if I could say it was boring, because boring makes it sound like I'm just saying it was merely dull. It was like comatose. I think if you put a gun to my head and said, okay, Tommy, you can either rewatch this match from beginning to end, or I will sit you down in a chair and make you watch wet paint dry on a wall for 2 hours, I might have to think about that one for a minute or two. If I could listen to music, I might go with watching the paint dry. There'd definitely be more happening with that than there was in this fucking match. Then we had Ragin' Bull out for a quick promo, mostly so he could just plug his title match with Arn Anderson, saying that he was sick of talking and it was time to find out who the better man was. And then he proceeded to speak in Spanish for like another minute, so I just skipped ahead. Then coming back from the break, Jimmy Garvin and Precious were back out for a promo segment. And yet another promo that I honestly didn't get all that much out of. I think Garvin just made fun of Wahoo's headwear. Then we had Ivan Koloff versus Tony Zayn. Oh, Jesus Christ. Okay. So I will note that when I was looking at the timestamp for this match, the first thing that hit me right out of the gate, it's weird. I feel like I've already seen about 8 or 9 segments on this show, and we're only about 30 minutes into the program. Are they really going to give this match time? Well, it got time. They went over 10 minutes through a commercial break for a Tony Zayn Ivan Koloff match. I wrote down, sanity must prevail in the end. It did not. Keep in mind, too, people, Ivan and Nikita are currently the top 8 ranked team in the seeds for the Crockett Cup Tournament. And they're having one of those guys do a back-and-forth competitive TV match with a guy whose entire body is constructed out of bruises and vanilla pudding. They had Ivan selling. They had Tony working from underneath and making a short, concise babyface comeback. They had Ivan dumping Tony out of the floor multiple times. Did I mention they went through a commercial? So they come back from break. They do like 5 more minutes of stuff. And eventually Ivan hit the Russian sickle from the second rope and won. -4 3/4 stars. -5 1/4 if it had happened in the Tokyo Dome. And then they had the gall to put Ivan and Nikita at the booth for a post-match promo. And I said, no. Not after I just watched Ivan bump around like a sack of potatoes for 10 minutes with Tony fucking Zayn. No, you don't get to make threats at any tag team in this company ever again after that garbage I just watched. This is a total AEW TV match in every conceivable way. A completely ineffective, unproductive, back and forth, quote-unquote squash where they let the job guy get in way too much offense to the point where it just becomes ridiculous and laughable. Good Lord. we had Dusty and Baby Doll at the booth again to... Well, at first I thought to do another promo, but turns out they came out so that Baby Doll could let Dusty know that she's getting his private plane ready. And then Dusty stayed out to scout an Arn Anderson Raging Bull TV title match. Why? I have no idea. All I know is the thought of Baby Doll personally taking it upon herself to fire up Dusty's private jet before he flies out to New Orleans while she waits in the plane to ride with him. Talk about standing by your man's side. That's some real, genuine burning desire right there. So like I said, it was Manny Fernandez and Arn Anderson for the TV title. And again, figuring they had a lot of airtime to kill by this point in the show, kind of assumed this one was going to get a little bit of time too, and that it did. At least this one was a more deserving match to get some time, though. Most of the story centered around the usual Arn shtick for a lot of these TV title defenses back in the day, where spends a good chunk of the match stalling and trying to run down the clock on the outside. There was a good element to this story in this match, though, where Manny had spent time barring Arn's leg and working that over on the mat. So as we progressed through the last few minutes of the match, Arn was really favoring that knee and selling it really well. And this is what I loved about watching Arn's matches back in the day, because he always paid attention to the small little details that matter. Like an example being him trying to do a knee drop on Bull with his bad knee, so when he comes down on it, he takes a minute to sell it and show that he shouldn't have used that leg. So when he goes back to the well with the same move, he uses the good knee this time, because he's not an idiot. And the finish was good too, with Manny hitting a flying burrito, but not being able to execute the pin before the bell sounded for the time limit draw. I'm not particularly sold that this match went the entire 20-minute length, but, I'm also not taking into account commercials. And they did the quick post-match deal with JJ coming out to confront Dusty at the desk so that Tully could run in and get the jump on Bull. Of course, Ronnie Garvin's there to make the save and send the heels packing, and Ronnie, of course, is still selling the bad right fist, so this is all good. And nothing to complain about with that. Jim Cornette was out for a promo. This is a little fantastic deal here. I love this. He says that he received a manila envelope with a sealed contract inside for a Magnum TA Dusty Rhodes versus Midnight Express tag title match. And meanwhile, Corny's standing there joking about the fact that Dusty and Magnum have never worked a single tag match together on this show, yet they're trying to stake their claim for a title shot. I loved his line where he said that all they do is come out to cut promos together, but that's because Magnum can never get an opinion on anything unless Dusty chimes in first. And he says that they can basically take the contract and shove it until they've earned a shot at the belts. And I do have to say here, I love Corny. Great manager, great worker, great heel. Looks horrendous in shades. Not a good look. Then the Midnight Express wrestled Art Pritz and some other generic 80s job guy with a receding hairline. I had no idea who it was. Of course, the Midnights killed them in the usual standard squash. We had a classic Corny line in here where he was joking about Baby Doll receiving all of her clothes from the Junior Moose department store. Because she's fat.
He's fat!
Oh, come on, Scotty. It's not nice. This is the first time I heard Cornette draw attention to Bobby Eaton going up to do that diving top rope leg drop and coming precariously close to hanging himself on that giant noose thing they had hanging from the rafters. Every single time I watch Bobby do that move at these studio shows, I see his head bump off that rope, and I always think to myself, how did this guy not catch his neck in that thing and kill himself? It's got to be a health hazard. And of course, as I noted here, Bobby Eaton and Dennis Condrey, two more sets of guys that were basically pulling double duty in multiple locations for a series of Crockett Cup matches, both in the afternoon and evening, while having to fly out to Atlanta to do a completely meaningless TV squash against Art Pritz and another generic bald-looking dweeb. God, people complain about the road schedule in WWE today. Then we had Tully Blanchard and J.J. Dillon out for a promo. And Tully has mysteriously garnered multiple cuts and bruises on his face in the course of the last 10 minutes, basically. One of which was plastered on his chin that kind of gave him a goatee look. Kind of cocked my head sideways at that at first. But Tully promised to beat Dusty any place, anytime, in whatever kind of match he wanted. And then JJ reminded us that, he reminded us of his statement from earlier on that he's giving NWA 7 days to make a decision on Ronnie's broken hand. And speaking of the devil, Ronnie Garvin came out to do a promo. Talked about having respect for the NWA team, and if they make the decision to force Ronnie to take off the protective tape from his hand, then so be it. Then we had Ron Garvin versus Brody Chase in the closer. The match was nothing, but I did like the attention to Ron selling that right hand anytime he did anything offensively with it. And again, it's not a complicated story to tell in matches, but it's rarely ever seen in the business today where guys will spend copious amounts of time, almost the entire match, selling a previously injured body limb. It'll wince a time or two, but to spend an entire 5 to 10 minutes actually selling it and not being able to execute certain moves or being slower to recover on things because of the injuries, it's almost unheard of that guys do that kind of stuff today. You know, even Ronnie having to win with a splash instead of doing the normal knockout punch. I mean, it makes all the sense in the world. Just so you know that I'm not a complete Ronnie Garvin hater. Terrible promo. Couldn't cut a halfway decent promo if you hung him upside down over a boiling pot of water, but dude was a solid worker. And really, I think my overall summary of this show would be, thank God they went out with a banger this week, because Jimmy Valiant came out to do one final promo stating that the Paul Jones Army have a little man complex, just like Hitler. And again, not joking here, direct quote from Valiant, Tony, who's that guy that put his hand in his coat like this? And Valiant goes to cross his hand over to his shirt for the pose, and Tony goes, Napoleon. And this was also made twice as great by Valiant having to ask for Tony to remind him again of what Whatley's name is, because even though he was out there less than an hour ago talking about him on the same show, Valiant has already forgotten that his name is Shaska Whatley. And Tony's standing there yelling out, Shaska, in a really annoyed tone. It was epic. And this will only be as equally as great if Jimmy Valiant comes out on the show every week from now on and has to have Tony remind him as to what Whatley's full name is. And of course, Jimmy let us know that he will shave Whatley's head by the end of 85 or 86, whatever year we're on now. So at least they went out putting a smile on my face, but I mean, when you look at the show overall, I think it's important to remember one thing. At the time the show was airing, taped of course, but the evening session of the tournament was pretty much already ongoing in New Orleans. So if you look past some of the time-traveling weirdness with guys working here in Atlanta on the syndicated television while also working in New Orleans the same night, the show was very weird. Obviously, the Paul Jones Army stuff is hilariously awful, but you know, when I really think about it in the scope of the show overall, it was probably the best material on this episode. You know, Arn and Manny was a good TV match for what it was, but my God, that Ivan Koloff match was torturous, and you know, even the Jimmy Garvin match was a complete nothing. It's a snooze fest, if anything. I did not hate the show, but I did find myself checking the timeline quite a few times to see how much longer I had left in the show. It's usually not a good sign when I have to revert to that. As noted, though, I will be tying in the evening session of the 1986 Crockett Cup review for the Monday podcast, so that's why I really didn't get into any spoilers or anything on this show, although I could have. But to put this one to bed real quick, watch the Paul Jones promo stuff on this episode and skip over the rest. And with that, we'll move right along here to the April 23rd, 1983 edition of World Class Championship Wrestling. So I think last week we left off with more of the continuation of the Von Erich Freebirds rehash matches, which consisted of a handcuff match that lasted all of like 5 minutes. Beyond that, though, I don't think there was anything of great substance on that episode last week. I remember we got the debut of the Mongol, which was pretty hideous. So I was kind of crossing my fingers, hoping for a better show this go-around. We began with the official world-class debut of Chris Adams, someone whose work and ring skill I really don't think I came to appreciate at a young age. Honestly, it wasn't until I went back in my latter teens and watched some of his old tapes in his later years with World Class where I honestly got more exposure to him. But when you kind of look at Chris's ring style and you compare it to the modern era of wrestling, he's one of those guys that would fit right in with a lot of the high-profile athletes we see today. Obviously, I think one of the more notable things about Chris Adams when you research his move sets and the kinds of techniques that he popularized and perfected, the super kick was among those. A wrestling move that has been completely neutered in the business today just because of how frequent and unsubstantial that move is now. Christ, you see virtually 85% of AEW's roster hitting that move in every single fucking match on television. I think I heard Cornette talk about this in an interview one time. Basically talking about Chris and how he was someone that never really got the chance to branch out beyond the world-class territory for most of his career. Yes, he did do some brief work in '86 for Bill Watts in the UWF. He had a brief stint in New Japan where he worked over there. I remember he did some stuff in the late 90s in WCW, right around the peak of the Monday Night Wars. So I guess that would have been, 96? Somewhere around there. And granted, he was doing mostly mid-card stuff by that point. But basically between 83 and, I don't know if it was 87 or 88, but most of Chris's peak work happened in World Class between that 5 to 6 year gap. And I think it's kind of unfortunate looking back at it because the guy was a hell of a worker. And, I think he would have been someone that could have done a lot more around the country if he got more exposure and he got the chance to work longer periods in some of the more major territories and markets. Regardless, though, this was his official debut to television, and it was a short and concise little babyface promo. Talks about coming in and hoping to garner the appreciation from the fans. He did refer to Texas as a beautiful country. Slip of the tongue, I guess. And he also said that he has his sights set on the Mongol. Apparently they have history. And that led right into Adams' debut match against Tom Ronesto Jr., who I had never heard of prior to this match, so tried to do a little research on him. I know that Tom Ronesto was an original member of the Assassins, but I don't think that was the same guy here, because the Assassins were mostly around during the 60s and 70s. And so presuming he was the son of Ronesto, I couldn't find anything on the guy's wrestling career beyond that. There was certainly no wiki page for him. Not that he did much of anything here to really impress me. It was just a showcase match for Adams, and it was solid. Again, Adams was a great old-school British-style worker. He had a fantastic enziguri to Ronesto here that sounded like a gunshot went off in the building. Beyond that, though, a lot of the match consisted of Adams wrenching on Ronesto's arm on the mat while he kept screaming, "No!" over and over again. And even Bill Mercer was kind of noting how annoying it was. And of course, Adams went over with the super kick finish, which, if I didn't see that move get completely bastardized in 2022, I probably would have been more impressed with it. Then we had King Kong Bundy. Then we had King Kong Bundy in a squash against a job guy whose name I totally couldn't figure out how to pronounce. I'm probably butchering this royally, but I believe the name was Sal Oliveris. Hope I'm getting that right. And, I mean, if you've seen one Bundy squash on this show by now, you've kind of seen them all. Actually, I think Mercer summed this one up perfectly. Bundy smashed and mashed and bashed on this poor guy for what felt like eons. Mark Lawrence did say before the opening bell that Bundy had previously lost a match that forced him to leave Texas for 60 days, but for reasons that were not really explained all that well, that stip was apparently being waived for this one match. Yeah, I don't get it either. Maybe they saw Mongols match last week and said, you know what, Bundy, why don't you take this one? Can't blame them. And in my favorite finish, Bundy ended up pulling Sal off the mat one too many times while trying to pin him, so the referee disqualified Bundy for kicking too much ass. Always a classic. And then Chavo Guerrero Sr. came in to run off Bundy after the attempted afterbirth beatdown, which at first I wrote down, wait, Chavo? Excuse me? Once again, I have no explanation. I don't ever recall seeing Chavo involved on this show prior to this very segment, but, well, here he is. It's kind of actually reminiscent of how we see a lot of guys debut in the business today. Just discount the redundant arena blackout. And he ended up hitting Bundy with a diving plancha over the top rope before he went to do an interview ringside, basically laying out the challenge to any and all heels that are up to the task, including the Freebirds. Interesting. And then we got the debut match of Kamala, facing off against Bill Ratke. And if y'all want the perfect epitome as to how people used to react to Kamala back in the day in the territories, especially in the early 80s when he was first showing up around the country, dude, check out those camera shots when he's coming through the crowd, especially the women. Like, they're either outright petrified or they're just totally befuddled by the situation, like having no idea how to react to this strange enigma. I said it last week, though, man. Kamala was a character. Anytime he worked a match, it was something to behold. A gimmick that would totally fall flatter than a plate full of piss in today's business, but in 1983, it was unique. And they found the perfect guy to work that gimmick. I mean, the match was a total nothing match, but, you know, even in the small things Kamala would do in his matches, the mannerisms, the unorthodox pacing and stomping, like I said, it was totally unlike anything you had ever seen by that point in the business. You know, especially for a time where kayfabe was still a thing back then, it was a scenario where you could suspend disbelief that Kamala really was a wild, untrained ass kicker. You know, the guy could move, he could work, and if you can look past the absurdity of the actual gimmick in retrospect, Kamala worked that character to perfection. We had a sit-down with Bill Mercer and Kevin Von Erich before the main event, mostly recapping the world title match from a couple weeks back. He was there to say that while he respects Bronco Lubitsch's decision, the fact is that for a split second, Kevin Von Erich was the NWA World Heavyweight Champion, and he knows if given the opportunity again, he will beat Ric Flair to officially become the champion. God, you just talk about genuine, authentic babyface promos from top-level wrestlers back in the day. Not too many did it better than the Von Erichs. You just go back and listen to a Von Erich promo from the 80s, you really believe every word they say. You know, it's so easy to sympathize with Kevin's situation, too, because he did essentially get fucked out of the world title in that match with Flair. All because of a bad official call. But he's not a whiny, petulant child. He's not an unprofessional crybaby who's, you know, calling bullshit about the whole situation. He just says, hey, it sucks. I should be the champion, but I'm not. So next time I get my shot at the belt, I won't miss. Simple, but holy cow, is it effective? And that brought us to Kevin Von Erich versus Terry Gordy for the American Heavyweight Championship in the main event. And you'll be happy to know that this one actually got more than 5 minutes this week. It was a hell of a little main event. Also had a fantastic finish, but I'll get to that in a minute. Going back, I know I talk about Kevin's physique all the time on this show, but what a fucking body that guy had. And not for a split second do I believe any of that is unnatural. Like, that's the body of a guy that trained every day and actually cared for how he looked on television. And he was a great athlete on top of that. You know, the spot where Terry gave Kevin the monkey flip off the ropes and Kevin landed flesh on his feet. I mean, yes, we do see guys do that all the time in the business today, but it's not too often you saw guys do it back in the 80s. You know, but even watching Kevin do things like picking up Terry and dropping him across the ropes with the guillotine, you know, even the strength-based stuff, like, that was impressive to see from a guy like Kevin. Picking up a guy Terry's size, that's a lot of meat. You know, it's easy to look past Kevin on the hierarchy of the Von Erichs, you know, at least when it came to star power. Yes, he probably wasn't as gifted on the stick, and he didn't quite have the size like David, but man, as great as Kerry was and as great as David was, I don't know, man. The more I watch of Kevin on these shows, his work really stands out above David and Kerry's. And the angle here at the end saw Michael Hayes come out to try and get involved, and he ended up swiping at Kevin's ankle to trip him up, but when Terry came down on Kevin, he actually reversed a roll through and pinned Terry while Hayes had his back turned in pre-celebration. And of course, he turns back to the ring and sees Kevin getting his hand raised, and he's just like, fuck! It was a good finish. People obviously went nuts for it. And, of course, the Freebirds were with Mercer afterwards, flipping their lid about the whole situation. I did note here, and I know we're only like 3 or 4 months into the actual Freebirds Von Erich feud, and I'm well aware this thing bleeds into the following year. Am I crazy, though, or are they already kind of beating the Freebirds like a drum in these Von Erich matches every week? I don't know, it seems like with very few exceptions, be it a DQ finish or something, I'm watching the Von Erichs pick up wins left and right over the Freebirds every week on these world-class episodes. I understand this is kind of like a standards and practices for the Dallas territory to put the hometown babyfaces over strong, you know, especially the Von Erichs. You know, you didn't want to beat those guys on television except on very rare occasions. Otherwise, people would riot and burn the building to the ground. But I'm still beyond baffled that this program was able to keep steam for as long as it did. I know that people got burnt out with it eventually, but, you know, especially after seeing the Von Erichs get multiple TV wins over the Freebirds, and we're only in month 4 of this thing. I mean, I guess when you're as over as the Von Erichs were in the 80s on Dallas turf, I mean, you could beat the Freebirds every week for years and years, and the people would never get sick of it. What can I say? Professional wrestling used to be amazing. So wrapping up for today, again, make sure to subscribe, leave a comment, and give the show a like down below if you would. It only takes a second to do it, and I'd appreciate all the support I can get, especially here on YouTube. And again, you can also follow the show on Rumble by checking the link in the description. Make sure to stop by on Monday for the AEW Rampage and NWA Power Rundown. And we are going to recap the 86 Crockett Cup, or at least the latter half of it. Should be a fun one. It's been a long time since I went back and watched that show. Until then, take care. Peace.